Good afternoon, faculty, staff, and students. The lecture will be delayed in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience. May we remind you again, remember to turn off your cell phone or switch it into silence mode. Thank you. Good afternoon, faculty, staff, and students. The lecture will be delayed again in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience. Again, may we remind you to turn off your cell phone or switch it into silent mode. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, faculty, staff, and students. It is our great honor to have your participation in today's Tigp distinction lecture. Now, let's start the lecture with the opening remarks by Academia Silicon President, Dr. James Liao. Please welcome James Liao.
Dr. Chung, Vice President Cho, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome every one of you to this special event honoring Dr. Morris Chang, who is the founding father of Taiwan's semiconductor industry. Of course, he doesn't need any introduction, but I'm still going to say a few things. So Dr. Morris Chang is known as the father of Taiwan's semiconductor industry. He's the founding chairman of TSMC, which is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC is one of the largest semiconductor manufacturing companies in the world. And since March this year, its market value has exceeded Intel, which is a tremendous accomplishment. Dr. Chung founded TSMC in 1987. And he has pioneered the business model of fabless manufacturing, fabless semiconductor industry. Because of that driving force, TSMC has become a major driving force for the fast innovation of this sector of industry in the past several decades. And most of you may think that he's a great businessman, and I think the reason for his success, many of you will attribute it to his business savvy, but I think it's his integrity that makes his business success. And I'm sure you'll become transparent how he conducts his life, how he manages his company. It's based on one single word: integrity. Dr. Chen was born in Ningbo in mainland China and grew up in several cities during the war, including Nanjing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai, then Chongqing, then Shanghai, then back to Hong Kong. He went to the U.S. For undergraduate education. He first entered Harvard University in the first year, and then transferred to MIT in the second year, eventually received his BS and MS degree from the Mechanical Engineering Department at MIT. He then joined a relatively small company called Sylvania Semiconductor for a number of years, maybe 2 or 3, and then he moved to TI, Texas Instruments, where he has rose to the rank of vice president in charge of the global business. And Texas Instruments has the eye to promote Dr. Chen and cultivate his talent, and even send him to Stanford for his PhD degree. So he received his PhD degree after joining TI, and his degree was in electrical engineering. He was recruited back to Taiwan and became the president of Tigp, Industrial Technology Research Institute, in 1985. The second year, he founded TSMC, and the rest is history. Dr. Chen received many awards and recognitions. I can only mention a few here. For example, he's a member of National Academy of Engineering in the U.S. He's a lifetime member of the MIT Corporation in the U.S., a fellow of the Computer History Museum in the U.S., and a laureate of Tigp. And he has received many honorary doctorates from 8 universities. Today he's going to share with us his life journey, and I'm sure you'll find great inspiration from his talk. And without further ado, let's give a round of big applause to welcome Dr. Morris Chang.
Thank you very much. Is the sound level okay? Last row, please. Raise your hands if the sound level is okay to you. It is okay, huh? Good. Thank you, President Liao and Vice President Zhou. It was Dr. Zhou that asked me to come here to give this talk. And I was quite pleased to receive it. I get many invitations to give talks and so on. Usually I decline most of them, particularly the talks that targeted the adults, businessmen, because I really think that after you reach a certain age, you are beyond being educable, you know. But for young people, I usually accept invitations to speak before young people. So most of my talks were given to university student audiences, maybe EMBA students who are still, in the early middle age. Today, I want to talk about my journey. And actually, I have had several journeys. Next slide, please. No, I don't think that's the next slide. Yeah, right. And there are more than 3 journeys in my life, but I will just talk separate journeys in my life. My aspiration and career journey, and my education and learning journey. Events that dictated my physical journey. And then my physical journey, in turn, dictated my aspiration and career journey, which in turn dictated my educational and learning journey. But then, the educational and learning journey also fed back into my aspiration and career journey. In fact, my education, learning journey helped me to fulfill my career aspirations. So, it's like this. All right, education and the learning journey, in my opinion, was by far the most important of these. Although, one cannot exist without the other, because they all have this interactional effect. Now, in my educational learning journey, of particular importance is lifelong learning. Let me just indicate the importance of lifelong learning to me. What I know today came, I would say, 90–95% from my lifelong learning. And maybe only 5%, 5 to 10% from my formal education. So, I know I'm talking to graduate students here. So you have worked long years on your degrees in school and so on, and it may be a little disconcerting to you for me to tell you that what you have learned in school, frankly, hopefully, will account for only 5% of what you will know by the time you are 50, 60 years old. Hopefully. I say hopefully because I'm hoping for you. Because some people, of course, don't learn very much after school, after they have graduated, after they've got their master's degree or PhD. Some people don't learn very much anymore. They think that they know enough. And those people are frankly the hopeless people. So, all right. So that's why I will talk especially about my lifelong learning. It's different from the ordinary lifelong learning. There's a Chinese saying, old Chinese saying, you live old and you learn old. 活到老，学到老. You live old and you learn old. You live to an old age and you learn to an old age. Well, that's not my lifelong learning. And I will talk about that at last. First, I will talk about my 3 separate journeys. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is a very complicated one, but fortunately, it's the only one that I will spend most of my time on. My physical journey, my aspirational and career journey, my education. All right, and this is the years, 1931 and 2017, and so on. All these are 1900, 20th century years. My age correspondingly. I was born in 1931, and so on. All right. As I said earlier, external events dictated my physical journey. So my physical journey, I was born in Ningbo. I think you know where Ningbo is. It's a big city now. Of course, when I was born, it was a small town. Ningbo. But I left Ningbo shortly after I was born because my father got a better job in Nanjing. So the first 5 years of my life, I was, the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I was in Nanjing. And I hardly have any memory of it, frankly. My memory basically started when we moved to Hong Kong. And what caused us to move to Hong Kong was the outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War. We started to get bombed, all right? And Hong Kong at that time was a haven, safety haven. It was a British colony, so it was not bombed. And I spent my elementary school years, the age from 6 to 12, in Hong Kong. And at the time we were in Hong Kong, World War II started also. Normally one attributes the beginning of World War II to 1939, which was the beginning of the European War. That was 1939, September 1939, Poland, Germany. And then, so Soviet Union, and then the Brits and the French, they all got into act. So that was actually the start of the European War, but normally it was also considered the beginning of World War II. And now, in Hong Kong for 6 years. Then in 1941, I did not show 1941 here, but on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese Air Forces attacked Pearl Harbor. A few hours later, and that's less known than the Pearl Harbor attack. A few hours after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, they also invaded Hong Kong. And Kowloon gave up after 3 days of fighting. So that was, December 11th, 1941. Kowloon gave up. And a week and a half later, precisely on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1941, Hong Kong also surrendered. However, we continued, my family and I continued to live under the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong for another year. And then in 1943, we went to Chongqing, which at that time was the free capital of China. Now, Chiang Kai-shek, the government had moved from Nanjing with the Sino-Japanese for the government, the Chinese government had moved from Nanjing to Chongqing. So, and that was the reason my family, my father went to Chongqing. So Chongqing was 2.5 years. And then the war ended. Both the Sino-Japanese War and World War II ended in August of 1945. I was 14 years old. And with the victory, our family moved to Shanghai. But then Civil War broke out almost immediately. So we lived in Shanghai for 3 years. And those 3 years, I would say, were probably my parents' golden years. I mean, they were, fleeing from one place to another all these years. And then 3 years, they thought they had settled down. And my father was rising in his career. He, in fact, bought a house in Shanghai with half of his savings. He did not realize that he would only live in the house for maybe 2 years. Because in 1948, the communists were coming. And so we went to Hong Kong again, the safe haven. So this is Hong Kong. This narrow strip is Hong Kong. And I was in Hong Kong for only 7 months, 7, 8 months. And I went to the United States in 1949. I did not mark it here. I mean, too many numbers already. 1949, I went to the United States. I alone. My parents did not go with me. They came to the United States later. And that started my U.S. life, and for 36 years, from age 18, 1949, age 18, to age 54, 1985, lived in the U.S. And then in 1985, I came to Taiwan. So up to 1987, up to this year, 2018, I've been in Taiwan 17 years. And the dotted line means that I still expect to live a few more years. All right, so that was my physical journey. And as I said, the physical journey actually dictated my aspirational and career journey. In high school, my aspiration was to be a writer, a Chinese writer. I was very good in Chinese. I'm still pretty good, but I was at my Chinese peak when I was in high school. I could write. Words flowed when I was in high school. And I think it was a writer, a pretty well-known American writer who was in the middle of writing Winston Churchill's biography. And the original plan, the writer's original plan, was to write 3 volumes. And he finished the first 2 volumes. And he did that in maybe 10 years, because each volume was a big one. And he was going to write a 3rd volume. But then he suddenly stopped. He announced, he said, well, when I started writing the Churchill biography, words flowed. But now, they don't flow anymore. I have difficulty finding words. And therefore, I am announcing the 3rd volume of Churchill's biography. It's solely because of my age, my inability. Well, I always think about him when I think about in writing Chinese. This guy was writing English. But I think the comparison is valid. Once upon a time, once upon a long time, his words flowed. But then eventually, and almost suddenly, the words didn't flow anymore. Now for me, it was a more gradual process. For me, the words flowed when I was in high school, but then in 36 years, I not only did not write any Chinese, I did not even read very much Chinese. I don't even talk very much Chinese. So words, Chinese words, stopped flowing gradually for me in these 36 years. Then I came to Taiwan, and I had opportunity and also need, not only opportunity, but need to write Chinese again. I tried to pick up my old ability, and I did succeed to a certain extent, because I wrote my autobiography, my first volume of autobiography, in 1997. But even then, I thought that I had long passed my peak in Chinese writing. Well, and that was 97 when I finished my autobiography, first volume autobiography. And recently, I don't think Dr. Liao told you that I announced my retirement. Did you say that? Yeah. I announced my retirement, not now. I announced my retirement in June of next year. And then I was asked, are you going to write the second volume by reporters? And I say yes. And I still mean it. I still want to. And I hope that I finish it. I haven't started it yet. I hope I finish it before my words stopped flowing to an extent that I couldn't finish it. All right. Anyway, so that was my physical journey. All right. As I said, it dictated my aspirational and career journey. And I think I began to say that I wanted to be a writer during the high school days. Basically, between the age of 12 and 17, junior high and the high school days, I wanted to be a writer. But as I had to go to the U.S., obviously, there'll be no future for a Chinese writer in the U.S. And the only future that appeared to be open to a Chinese boy and to his parents, the only future in the U.S. for a Chinese young person was in the technical area, science or engineering. Well, at least that was the only still reasonably bright future that seemed to be available to a young Chinese person in the U.S. in the early 50s. See, I went to the U.S. in 49 and expected I would get my college degree, maybe my master's degree in the middle 50s. And I did actually, in the middle 50s. And back then, and I expected that I would not be able to go back to China. China was in a pretty tumultuous period. So my career, after I get my degrees, my career will be in the U.S. And it seemed to my parents and to me that the brightest available opportunity would probably be in the science and technology, engineering area. So rather than trying to be a Chinese writer, I needed to become a scientist or engineer. And all right, just for your information, if you don't know that, actually, most Chinese people in the early 50s in the United States, most were either laundry operators or restaurant owners. And most of them were in Chinatown. There was a minority that was in the science and engineering area, and they were doing research or they were teaching. They were the more elite group among the Chinese that were among the Chinese Americans that were in the United States in the 50s. Actually, the phenomenon lasted longer than the 50s. It lasted into the 60s at least. I mean, there was no such thing as a Chinese lawyer, no such thing as a Chinese novelist, a Chinese writer, no such thing as a Chinese politician in America. No. And, but there were Chinese, a minority, Chinese scientists, engineers, Chinese professors. All right, so I switched my aspiration from writer to mechanical engineering, which was an arbitrary choice. I mean, it could be electrical engineering, it could be civil engineering, but it had to be engineering or science. But I switched to mechanical engineering, and I indicated these are supposed to be, bombs, major happenings. And then mechanical engineering, and I thought that the thing to do was to try to be a researcher and a teacher. Well, so I was at MIT at that time, but now let me just cross over to this. Oops. What is it? Yeah. And let me cross over to this. But then another bomb happened. At MIT, I had gotten my BS degree, my MS degree in mechanical engineering. But in 1955, I flunked. I failed the MIT Mechanical Engineering PhD qualifying exam. And, that was that. Years of schooling, and I was planning to go on for the PhD, but then I flunked the PhD exam. And there was, in my autobiography, I said that there was an event that caused me to lose my sleep, to become an irregular eater for a week. Then after that week, however, I woke up. That, frankly, was the start of my life. The sad experience of flunking the MIT PhD exam changed my life. I changed my aspirations. Without a PhD, of course, I could have gotten a PhD from another school. MIT was at that time really standalone, a top technical university in the United States. And I think in another school, frankly, even at Stanford, then I could probably have passed a mechanical engineering PhD exam. Stanford or, of course, even lesser university. But I woke up, I said, what the heck? Why do I have to get a PhD? Why do I have to be a teacher and a researcher in mechanical engineering? I could be a businessman. businessmen, were rare. I could be a manager, and that would be another route. So I changed my aspirations and looked for a job. And the first job I got was in semiconductors. And I think Dr. Liao said that. Sylvania, a small company, semiconductors. Had nothing to do with my mechanical engineering master's degree. Nothing whatsoever. All the stuff I learned in the mechanical engineering courses, almost all the stuff anyway. I did take basic physics, I did take basic chemistry, basic mathematics as a part of my mechanical engineering bachelor's and master's degree. Those were useful, at least the physics and mathematics part anyway, not so much the chemistry part. Those were useful. But outside of those, it took years of courses in machine design, in machine design shop, useless semiconductor. And I took years of courses in vibration, and all I can remember was the professor vibrating on the stage, And I took at least a couple of years of fluid dynamics, useless. And I took 2 years of internal combustion engine, theory and shop. Well, I guess I did get something. I was able to do minor repairs of my car, minor repairs, But basically, almost everything I learned in my mechanical engineering course at MIT was useless, became useless when I took my first job as a semiconductor engineer at this small company, Sylvania. However, my aspiration now had changed. I wanted to be a semiconductor engineer now, and slowly and eventually a businessman, at least a manager of companies, rather than this research and teaching thing. All right. Then after 3 years at Sylvania, this small company, I decided that that company was going nowhere in the semiconductor business. So I went to the biggest company in semiconductors at that time, Texas Instruments. And I went, to what was then considered the wilderness. Texas was the wilderness, all right? And I was in Boston. Boston was and still is the seat of culture. When I told my friends that I was going to Texas, they were all shocked. Texas? Why do you want to go there? Cowboys and oil. Well, but it turned out to be a very good decision. Particularly since I wanted to be a semiconductor engineer, and more wanted to be a business manager and businessman. Now, indeed, my hopes were realized because I was, first of all, in Texas Instruments. Not only was I the first Chinese or the first Asian, but also the first big Eastern University graduate. Yeah, MIT. And now, as I will say later, in the 3 years at Sylvania, my first job, semiconductor, my lifelong learning already started. And the first phase of my lifelong learning, starting right after I dropped out of MIT, was semiconductor physics. And that was a very important phase. And of course, Sylvania also had laboratory experience, et cetera, et cetera. And with my my own learning of semiconductor physics, almost immediately after I got to Texas Instruments, I succeeded in becoming an excellent engineer. I improved their yields to such an extent that even the chairman of Texas Instruments recognized me. And it was he, in fact, that then sent me to Stanford PhD. I think Dr. Liao mentioned that. But actually I wasn't really all that interested in getting a PhD at the time, because I already had my mindset on being a business manager, you know. But his offer to send me to Stanford, or to a school of my choice, and at that time Stanford was the obvious choice for me. Full salary. That was an offer I could not refuse. It was an offer I could not refuse. Even though I didn't particularly welcome it, but it was an offer I could not, because if I refuse it, he would think that, I'm a hopeless guy, you know. Well, here's a guy I want to promote. Here's a guy that I want to develop. And yet you're refusing this such an unusual offer, you know. So I could not refuse it. So I went. But of course, when I went this time, I studied semiconductors now, electrical engineering, semiconductors. I was pretty good there. I don't know how many times better as a student. I was 10 times better, maybe 100 times better than I was at MIT. I passed my Stanford PhD, electrical engineering. Changed course, you know. Passed my electrical engineering PhD, qualified with flying colors. And I finished my PhD in 2.5 years. After changing courses, I owe a lot to the learning, the self-learning that I did in the in-between years, the 6 years of work, all of which were in semiconductors. All right, so I went back to Texas Instruments. That's this point now. Now, then my aspiration and my career started to take off. I became a department manager, product line manager. I mean, it was a P&L unit. It actually had 3,000 employees. 3 or 4 months after I went back, 3 or 4 months after I got my PhD at Stanford and went back to TI, Texas Instruments, I was promoted to be a department manager with 3,000 employees. And the department had not just development, but also engineering, manufacturing, marketing, etc. So that was the real start of being a businessman. Here. Now, on and on, and I stayed at TI until 1983. And I then went to General Instrument. In these years, my businessman aspect just kept increasing. My engineer aspect kept decreasing. All right. I said in a recent talk that I, only do what I like to do. I only work at what I like to work on. And I like my work. I stayed at Texas Instruments for 25 years. I liked the first 23 years, 22 or 23 years of it. So I stayed. And then the last 2 years, I just didn't like it anymore. So I decided to leave. And I went to General Instrument. I left TI without a job offer. But the job offers just very quickly came in as soon as the news of my leaving TI was announced in the papers, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc., and trade papers. Offers kept coming in, and I chose General Instrument to be the president of General Instrument in New York. But I almost did not like the job from the very beginning. So I stayed there for only a year. And I quit. And this time, there weren't that many offers. All right? Texas Instruments was a big, well-known world-class company. General Instrument was also well-known, but it was not considered to be as high class as Texas Instruments. So when I left Texas Instruments, a lot of offers, a lot of interview requests came in. Now when I left General Instruments, not so many, but there were still quite a few. And those mainly came from the venture capital area. And I was what you would call an angel investor for 6 months. And that was another thing, another phase in my lifelong learning. In the 6 months, I learned a lot about venture capital. But I decided not to do it as a full-time job. I could have done it full-time job, but I decided that all my life up to that point was in managing a sizable enterprise. And venture capital would make money for me, but it was not equal to my ability of managing. I thought my strength was in my ability to manage a big business. So while I learned a lot about venture capital in the 6 months after I left the arrangement, well, in fact, I made some money too in the 6 months. by being an angel investor. But I decided that I would not do it as a full-time job. And I was only 54 years old, 54. And then Taiwan beckoned. All right. Taiwan wanted to recruit me to be, is that clock right? Yeah. Oh, what is it anyway? October 13th. Okay, all right. So this is all right. Okay, fine. I'm pretty much on time, I think. Yeah. Taiwan beckons, 85. And that's obviously another bombshell. And then, I came to be the president of the Industrial Technology Research Institute. However, just barely 2 weeks after I took the ITRI presidency, I was called in by a minister in the government and said, how about starting a business, starting a semiconductor company? So, well, at that time I thought that, I will start a company. As my second job, my sideline job, okay? ITRI presidency was still the main job. I started. So I was an entrepreneur and businessman. But, and I started Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC, in 1987. But I had to raise money. And here's where the venture capital experience came in handy. I had to raise money and raised money for more than a year. Started raising money in the third quarter of 85 and didn't raise all the money until the third quarter of 86, more than a year. But I started in early 87, February of 87, started TSMC. And from there on was I was an entrepreneur, but 10 years after the startup, the entrepreneurial content started to diminish. The business company became big. You can't just be an entrepreneur, you have to be a businessman again. That's what this means. In the last 20 years or so, the businessman content began to go up. All right. Then I announced that next year I will retire. Then my exploration will be life for myself and family. Okay. All right. I think that should be all for this slide. Now I want to talk about what I mean by lifelong learning, because it's such an important part. I would say it's 95% part of my educational and learning journey. Okay. All right, what do I mean by lifelong learning? My lifelong learning. It's different from 做到活到老学到老 live to an old age and learn to an old age. It's different from that. I don't just pick up stuff, fragments of stuff. I have purpose. And I learned the purpose is to learn primarily for career, primarily for career. What do I foresee that I will need in my career? I try to learn there. I try to learn for that. And secondarily for other than career interests. But definitely, I do not learn for a degree. I do not learn. At MIT, in retrospect, at MIT, I was learning basically to get a degree, first to get master's degree, and then wanted to get a PhD. Of course, I failed in the qualifying exam, but I was at MIT all the time at MIT. I was learning in retrospect. I was learning for a degree. And that's the wrong way. That's the wrong thing to do. So my lifelong learning is not for a degree, but primarily for career. My lifelong learning is also planned and phased. And that's important. All right, the first phase, right after I got my job at Sylvania, my first job, right after I flunked the MIT thing and got my first job in the semiconductor industry, my first phase was semiconductor physics. And, I think I have time for a small story. You say, so you do that by reading? Yes, I did it by reading. But it was such minute reading, it was such careful reading that the book I used was Shockley's book. It was a classic, Holes in Electrons, I think. Electrons and Holes in Semiconductors, written by William Shockley, who won the Nobel Prize for having invented the transistor. So I used his book. But it was very, very difficult for me. So I had to have a teacher. So my small story is that I did have a teacher. My teacher was a Sylvania colleague. He was maybe 10 or 15 years older than I. He was very knowledgeable. And he was a drunk. And back then, I was 24 years old, and he was maybe 35 or even 40. And he was knowledgeable, and he was a drunk, and he was a colleague, senior colleague at Sylvania. So we stayed in the same motel. See, Sylvania back then was just starting up this business, and we moved to a small town, and practically all of us had to stay in motels in that small town. And this fellow stayed in the same motel as I. And every night, after work, from 6 to 10, he was in the bar, in that motel. Well, the bar was also where the restaurant was, bar-restaurant, in the motel. So about 7 o'clock or maybe 7:30, I would go down for dinner. I had not started drinking anything yet at that point. But he was almost always there. And as my other colleagues described, he was actually drinking his dinner, okay? So I would go down there, and I would ask him about the questions I had after my reading. I mean, I usually manage only 5 to 10 pages every day, every night. So I had questions carried over from the previous night, or maybe from the same evening. And he could almost always answer my questions. And I needed him, because you cannot do it but just by reading alone. I think it was Dr. Li who said in his autobiography that he didn't go to Tigp classes sometimes, and people accuse him of skipping classes. And he said, what's the use of going to these classes? The professor just reads the textbook. I can read the textbook faster than he can talk. Well, that was Dr. Li. That's not me, you know. I needed a teacher, all right. And I guess my teacher, my colleague, my drunk colleague, was probably a better teacher than the Tigp professor that Dr. Li. Yeah. But anyway, he could, well, almost always answer my questions. And so I ate my dinner, asked him questions, and finished it by an hour. And then I would leave, go back to my room, and do my reading again. As I said, I averaged 5 to 10 pages. I mean, doesn't sound like very much, but with the Shockley book, I think it's a feat, that I could do that. And I did finish most of Shockley's book in about 4 months. With very much with the help of this colleague. Yeah. All right. So that was the first phase. And then later on, as my businessman aspiration began to grow, there was a phase when I self-learned finance, and after I became a general manager at Texas Instruments, then I had to learn marketing and sales, and later on business strategy, and in a later phase yet, venture capital, and then in a still later phase, corporate governance, private equity, and geopolitics, which is primarily interest, the interesting part of my other than career interests. So geopolitics, cross-strait relations, same idea, same nature, and modern American, Chinese, and English histories, etc. These are primarily other than career interests: geopolitics, cross-strait relations, modern American, Chinese, and English histories. And my lifelong learning is also discipline. So many hours per week. Now, how do I do it? I mean, a few months ago, I had dinner with a politician, and we began to talk about cross-strait relations and geopolitics and things. And at the end, he said, Morris, Dr. Chan, how do you know so much about these subjects? But then he immediately answered the question himself. I must be reading. I know you're a big reader. Well, I didn't correct him, but he was wrong. You can't do it, this self-learning thing. If you do it just by reading, my goodness, it's rather unproductive. So what are my revenues? Intellectual conference is a pretty important one, and several a year, all right? And what are intellectual conferences? Think tank conferences, investment conferences, alma mater, and I have 3 of them, Harvard, MIT, and Stanford. And primarily, however, it's MIT. I spent the longest time there, and I've begun to like them now, okay? when I failed the PhD exam, I said in my autobiography, by the way, I respect them 10 points, but like them only 5, okay? And now I'm beginning, I still respect them 10 points, but now I begin to like them at least 7 or 8 points now, okay? And they have begun to like me very much. Committees by MIT advisory committees. I'm on the economics advisory committee. I'm on the Sloan School, that's the business school advisory committee. I'm also on the electrical engineering advisory committee. And I'm also I'm a life member emeritus. So I go to corporations meetings, which are basically board meetings. All right. And conferences, alma mater, committees and conferences, etc. That's several a year. Average 5 or 6 a year, maybe even more. Conversations with experts, many among them. And I usually enjoy very much dinner with experts in many fields. Could be in AI, could be in geopolitics, could be in cultural relations. Anyway, I have many of them in my time. Just last night I had dinner with, I'm not going to say who because reporters and so on, big nuisance. All right, reading. Reading is important, although I think it's really the most time-consuming, and basically it is not all that productive. But it is necessary, and I do learn a lot. Mainly, it's I learn a lot from New York Times. I'm an electronics edition subscriber, the Wall Street Journal, and Economist, which I read in paper copies. Taiwan newspapers and magazines I read in paper copies also. Book reviews, I read a lot of book reviews. And you may know, or you may find out if you start reading book reviews, that the book reviews are often better than the books themselves. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, book reviews and selected books, and most of these selected books are recommended after. Are the ones that I read from the book reviews, but some, were recommended by in these conversations, and so. Then, of course, there's always on the job. I've been the chairman of TSMC for 30 years now. So we have a lot of semiconductor experts in the company. So, I learn from them. And that's many. In fact, I would say many a week. Every week there are many, All right. Do I have a next slide? That's all. So, that's it. And I guess I finished about 5 minutes late. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Morris John. May we invite the President now to come up to the stage and host our Q&A session. Before the Q&A session, on behalf of Academia Sinica, President Liao will present a souvenir to our speaker, Dr. Maurice Zhang.
Ah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, it is time for Q&A session. Please wait a moment. Our staff will set up some stuff on the stage.
While we're preparing for the stage, you can prepare your questions. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions to ask. Thank you.
Cookie, you make coffee. But, oh, very definitely the coffee, yeah.
Okay, now we'll open the questions. Is there any questions? Somebody, please raise your hand. Yes, please.
Thank you, Morris, for the inspired talk. And my question is, after you graduate from MIT or from by the PhD program, what makes you decided to step into the semiconductor industry? Was there a trend over that industry during the middle of the 90s? So that's my question.
Can you repeat the question?
When you failed the PhD exam in MIT, what made you join the semiconductor industry? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's my question.
Why did you choose semiconductor industry?
That's very interesting. I actually wrote about that at length in the volume 1 of my autobiography. I got 3 or 4 offers. I think it was 4 offers. And 3 of them, it was 4 offers, which I think it was. 3 of them were mechanical engineering related. The 4th one was Sylvania, which was semiconductors. And I dismissed the lower salary too, almost right away. But the higher salary too, one was mechanical engineering related. It was from Ford Motor Company, a very well-known, of course, you know that. You know Ford Motor Company. Very well-known company. And they wanted me to do work that was really related to my MIT mechanical engineering education. You know, stuff I dismissed just an hour ago, internal combustion engines and fluid dynamics, I mean, everything I would be able to use. Or maybe I didn't take the job. However, that offer from this big company, Ford Motor Company, was $479 a month. Now, the one related to semiconductors, Sylvania, was $480 a month. So I thought that Ford is where I wanted to go. But why do they offer me $1 less than the job that I really didn't want to take? So I called them. It was the call that decided me. Because when I went to Ford for interview, I mean, they were very warm, you know. The personnel director was extremely warm, and he really, I got the impression that he really wanted me. And since he represented the company, I got the impression that the company really wanted me. But when I called him, and well, first of all, I called him from my father's home. And back then, you know, long distance calls were quite expensive. So I first tried to call collect, which meant, of course, that Ford will pay. And that was refused. That was refused. I announced my name and announced my name, and I thought that he would recognize me since he had wanted me so much when I interviewed him. But he refused to take the collect call. Now I didn't give up, so I called on my father's expense, okay? It turned out to be quite a lot of money. This was back in 1955. Now, instead of being warm, as he was during my interview, he was very cold. So I said, look, I really want to come to Ford, but I do have a competing offer which is more. I didn't tell him it was only $1 more. Because I was trying to get a lot more than $1 more, you know. So I made it sound like it was at least $20 more, okay? So I did have a competing offer that was more than yours, although I really want to come to Ford. Would you consider my salary offer? And as I said, he was very cold. He said, look, we made our offer. If you want to come, good. If you don't want to come, so be it. It was that attitude that really discouraged me. In fact, I was a bit embarrassed by my own effort, by my own attempt, you know. I mean, here's a company I really thought I would want to go to. And I just want to get a few more dollars from him, but I was rebuffed so coldly. So I was a bit embarrassed. This is what I call in Dongwon a mixture of anger and humiliation. Now, a mixture of anger because, you know, his attitude had changed. So I had misread the earlier indications that he wanted me to come. That was anger. Humiliation also because, you know, he rebuffed me so much. All right, so I said, what the heck, you know. I'll go to this Sylvania thing, yeah. And that turned out to be a very fortunate decision. Yeah.
Any other questions? Next, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. So mine is your journey back to Taiwan. So when you, after some time, you want to ask, so was there any semiconductor company when you were, then you'd like to share, like, how much did you start the company with, and how did you raise money? Some of us could learn from some of your ways. Thanks.
came back to Taiwan about the companies. Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I did not come back to Taiwan. I came to Taiwan. Because I was not from Taiwan. Now, secondly, yes, there were semiconductor companies. There were fabless. Fabless company means companies that did not have manufacturing, that did not have fabs. Fab is a factory in the semiconductor lingo. Fab is a factory. There were a few design companies that didn't have fabs. And there was one company that both had design and factory, and that was UMC. Yes, there were a few. It was a very extremely small industry, but there were a few companies, a few semiconductor companies.
Next, please.
Okay. Thank you. I'm really honored to attend this. What is success to you, and what do you advise people to be successful, like even if not like you, but to be successful in their life? So
People to become successful. Would that be a rephrase of your question?
yeah,
What would be my advice to
Advise
people?
people to be successful.
How do I advise people to succeed?
Yeah, to succeed, to become successful. Would that be?
yeah, and before that, I ask, what is success generally?
I don't want to be overly philosophical here, but success is in everybody interprets success in different ways. I interpret success as happiness. As long as I'm happy, I'm successful. That has been my interpretation all my life. Of course, I need a certain level of income to be happy, okay? But I can assure you that level of income is not very high. So my idea of happiness, of success, is happiness. Well, that's actually fully consistent with the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness. And I have a pursuer of happiness, and that's my idea of success. Now, if you mean material success, well, I mean, it's difficult for me to advise you because, you know, if you want wealth, there are various ways of getting it, most of which are kind of illegal or unethical. Okay? If you want, accomplishment, there are also various ways of doing it. Or if you want academic accomplishment, you just study hard, you learn hard, you research hard, and that sort of thing. Of course, you've got to have some talent to begin with, Now, if you want accomplishments in business, then I think you ought to, do what I did, sort of a lifelong learning process. But but my interpretation of success is very simple, and frankly is not so difficult to achieve. Happiness, So, and if it doesn't take too much income to achieve happiness, as in my case, when I quit doing the instrument, I felt I already had enough wealth to give me an annual income. I mean, back then, it's like a few percent interest, I think even with that, I could be happy. So I came to Taiwan, to do things that I thought I would like, because financially, I felt that I didn't have to depend on anything I make in Taiwan.
Next question, please. Yes.
Instead of your successful journey, is there anything you regret?
In addition to your successful stories, is there anything you regret?
Oh yeah. I regret many things, but personal, yeah. I mean, I regret not having been able with my parents, for instance. They lived in New York. As I said in my talk, the 3 years right after the war were my parents' golden period. Then, of course, they moved to the United States. My father was only 44 years old, and my mother was only 40 years old. And they lived in New York all the time in the United States. And my father died when he was 86. This is my age. This is my present age. My father died. So he went to the U.S., New York, at 44 years old, and he died when he was 86. 42 years. My mother went to New York at 40, and she didn't die. She died when she was 102, and it was 62 years for her. 42 years for my father, 62 years. And they were stable period. I mean, they didn't have to flee from anything in New York. Stable life. But really, for my father and for my mother too, and there was this, frustration that he didn't get to do what he thought he was going to do when he was young. He didn't get a meaningful job in the United States at all. He went to business school at the age of, he arrived when he was 44, and he thought you would still have a career in the United States. So a year after he arrived, he went to the Columbia Business School. Education, formal school education. And he was the only Chinese student and the oldest student in his class. And he took 3 years to finish the Columbia Business School. And he thought that he would have a job opportunity, a good job opportunity. Well, no, he didn't. He got, as far as I know, he got 2 job offers. One was as an assistant professor in a small college in Massachusetts. And that paid even less than what I got offered, much less than what I got offered from either Ford Motors or Sylvania, you know. Of course, I had much better credentials. I had MIT master's degree, you know, and he had this MBA from Columbia, and he got an offer as an assistant professor in a small college in Massachusetts. The offer he got was as a bank clerk, a clerk that would even have to wait on counters, you know. Well, back then there was no automated banking, you know. You go to a bank, you would deposit money or you would withdraw money. I mean, there would be clerks, you know, standing behind the counter. So he got, that was the other offer. Now, of course, he didn't accept either of those 2 offers. And then pretty soon, his savings ran out. And he and my mother opened a shop on Broadway in New York. And for about 20 years, they basically earned their own labor, you know, the shop. Well, when he in 1971 for me was a kind of breakthrough year financially. And I was able to support them financially, 1971. So he and my mother retired in 1972 because I was now able to financially support them. But basically, you know, the last 40, 50 years of their lives, my parents' lives, they were kind of frustrated. So not being able to spend time with them was certainly a regret. Well, anyway, there were other regrets, but mainly they were personal, you know. And I'm not going into those anymore. But career-wise, learning-wise, I don't think I have any serious regrets. Maybe except the period I was at MIT, learning all about machine shops and the vibration and the internal combustion engine. Yeah.
Okay, next question, please. Yes.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for your interesting speech. And here I have a question for what do you think is the next big thing in electrical engineering, like semiconductors?
What do you think is the next big thing in electrical engineering? Or
Electrical
semiconductor?
engineering. Well, next big thing. I think I would say AI. I would say AI. Yeah. AI, IoT, they're all tied up together. Yeah. AI, IoT. I think it's probably the next big AI will definitely affect our lives in both a good way and a bad way. But just like the smartphone, you know. Yeah, this thing has affected billions of people's lives. Really, has affected it hasn't affected my life so much, but has affected my life in the way that has vastly affected my wife's life, okay? She doesn't even talk to me anymore, you know. I mean, all she does is you know, communicate with her friends on the same. And we will be in the same room. We'll be in the same room. And I would hear her talking. And I thought she was talking to me, but she wasn't. You know. She was talking to, what was it, Siri or whatever, you know. You know. And, this thing, you can take it around the world. I just read a book. The writer just spent a whole year just taking his smartphone around the world. He is an American. He said in the book, his first stop was Shanghai. And this thing would translate for him, you know. So he not only could hail a cab, or he hailed a cab with this thing also. And the GPS on this thing would just tell the cab driver where you wanted to go. And it will also do the translation for him so that he could carry on a simple conversation in the cab with the cab driver. And then he used this thing to pay for almost everything, you know. And to reserve things and so on, you know, reserve hotels and so on. And of course, my wife uses this thing for other purposes. She uses it mainly to communicate with her friends. And, has affected life. And I have often said that 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, even 20 years ago, if you were a non-social young man, this is what I was. When I was in high school, I became sociable when I was in college, when I was at Harvard and at MIT. I became quite sociable, and I had friends then. But in high school, I had no friends. I had no brothers and sisters to begin with, and I was not very good in sports. So the kids wouldn't play sports with me, and wouldn't play games with me. I had very few friends, no friends. But now, with this thing, you have a social network. Now, 20, 30 years ago, I'm talking young women now. The plainer young women had no boyfriends either, But now they do, okay? What is it? Yeah. So it has changed the life of billions of people in the world. And I think artificial intelligence will have the same effect. For one thing, it will eliminate a lot of jobs. Now you have, I see patients waiting in the hospitals in line, and for 2 or 3 hours of waiting, they get to see the doctor to diagnose a very simple ailment. The artificial intelligence can do that pretty easily.
Okay, we'll have the last question, but before that, I'm going to take the privilege of being moderator. I'm going to ask my own question. So, Morris, you have moved several times in your life from places to places. You must be very good at adapting to new challenges. Can you tell us about how you adapt to a new environment?
I think I was, but I'm 86 years old now. I don't think I will be very good at adapting to places anymore. Well, I think I can readapt myself to the United States very easily. Okay. But yes, to answer your question, when I was younger, yes, I felt that I could adapt myself very well. And I also had perhaps a more adventurous spirit. Now, a lot of places were forced on me, you know. I mean, all the places before I was 18, well, my parents took me. But all those choices were pretty much forced on him, too. Now, of course, after I got to that place, I was able to adapt myself quite well. I liked Hong Kong very much. I liked Chongqing. And it was a suburb of Chongqing, and I liked that very well. And Shanghai, of course, I liked even better, you know. And then Hong Kong, Boston, I loved it. Boston, I loved it, you know. And even Texas, I liked it. Yeah.
So you grew up in a wartime China and moved to the United States. Did you find it was easy or difficult to adapt to a new culture, a new environment?
No, it was exciting. Exciting is the adjective, I think. It was really exciting. Well, bear in mind, my father was actually a very westernized person. And when I was in Shanghai, the 3 years between 1945 and 1948, in the 3 years, my father and my mother tried to give me a Western education. I had an English tutor. That's not a remedial teacher, you know, my English. I mean, my English scores were pretty high in high school. And the English teacher, my father hired him just because he felt that the future world belonged to the Western world. So he wanted me to speak as good English as possible. And he hired a violin teacher for me. I picked up violin, but that's how I got to like classical music. Violin very much, but I music. He also, in fact, entered me into a tennis club. So I played tennis when I was 16, 17 years old. And I had a coach also, you know, sort of paid by the lesson. So all these were Western things that he tried to improve me.
We have a very good tennis court here.
Haven't played for 50 years. So.
Well, last question from the audience. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Morris, for this amazing talk. So my question is, what is the most important lesson that you have learned that you didn't get from your formal education? Thank you.
What is the most important lesson you learned after you finish your formal education? Is that correct?
Yes.
After I finished my formal education?
Yes. What is the most important lesson you learned after your formal education?
Everything. As I said, 95% of things I know now, I learned after my formal education. As to the most important thing I learned, most important lesson I learned before I even had formal education. And that was happiness was my main goal in life.
Okay, I think we all learned a lot today, and we all get very much inspired by Morris' wonderful talk and benefited from his lifetime journey in many aspects. And let's thank him without most of warm gratitude here.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morris Zhang, for the insightful and inspirational lecture. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. It concludes the formal part of today's lecture. We have prepared some dessert and a reception area. Please go out from the back entrance door on the 4th floor for the desserts. Please enjoy your time together and have a pleasant evening. Thank you very much.